lot of controversy around BIP 119 and its implementation on Twitter lately. This is a sort of a proposed Bitcoin upgrade. Can you talk a little bit about this news in the Bitcoin world and how it compares maybe the cadence of upgrades to Bitcoin as compared to other networks like Stacks?
Yeah, so I think it's basically first of all, like I'm personally like not that surprised by the pushback. Like it was almost like expected, because the way, at least I've observed things in the Bitcoin ecosystem is that even though it's a very decentralized ecosystem, and over time they've kind of like built the muscle to basically reject changes, right? So if you look at kind of like the history of Bitcoin, like the block size wars and other types of changes that people wanted to make, the Bitcoin ecosystem actually has a very strong muscle for rejecting changes, right? And the core design of Bitcoin is really, really good. So Bitcoin can actually survive or thrive even if it doesn't change, like at all, right? If anything, people would argue that that is a property, that Bitcoin is valuable because it doesn't change and because it's durable and people can kind of like rely on it. So think of that as a very simple base layer. But the reality is also that there are, certain core developers who have over time kind of like, earned a reputation in some of the circles where if they propose something and some of their other colleagues who, are also have a reputation, kind of like back it, then generally, that change or proposal would have a much easier time out there than some quote unquote outsider who comes in, right? So I think Jeremy, like I'm like friends with him. I like him. I think his heart is at the right place. But the challenges were kind of like, you should have expected them, right? Because he's not one of those people. Like he's an outsider and he's proposing a change. And the Bitcoin kind of like, gut reaction of rejecting any change is kicking in, right? And so that's how I kind of like view it. And as far as like, Stacks is concerned, back in like 2017, when we were looking at the initial design of the Stacks main chain, it was almost like an explicit design requirement that we cannot even have a single thing in there that requires a BIP at the Bitcoin side. Because imagine that you're building this complicated programming layer for Bitcoin, and you go like, you know what, we will propose this BIP, even if it takes years, eventually it will get through. And by the time, the mainnet launches, which we knew would be at least 2-3 years of work before the mainnet could launch, we will kind of like have this BIP approved. And I am so glad that we had that design requirement, because you can't rely, if you're building in the Bitcoin ecosystem, you cannot rely on any changes that you're making to the Bitcoin-based protocol, because it might never happen. Right. So it doesn't mean that, Bitcoin will never adopt anything. It recently adopted Taproot. If anything, I think some of the BIP 1119 discussions are now making people wonder that did we even have enough discussions about Taproot, because it was coming from a more kind of like, trusted source. And generally speaking, in the Bitcoin ecosystem, I think it had a far easier time getting through and getting adopted. And it's really the only upgrade that has really happened since like 2017 block size wars, right? So I think, in summary, I think like it's a little bit like if Bitcoin never changes and Bitcoin keeps rejecting most of these upgrades, maybe it's not the end of the world, right? Like because Bitcoin is kind of like supposed to be like that. Obviously, it will be great if Bitcoin can selectively have certain upgrades over time, and that would make life of like a bunch of developers, like the ones in our ecosystem, easier and better. But I don't think it's the end of the world that Bitcoin basically never changes and just remains a very, very simple business.
All right, great, thank you. Well, thanks everyone for tuning into Stacker Chats. Please make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know any questions that you have either in the comments below or on Twitter. Thanks, Muneeb, for being here, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you so much.